Hello and welcome to Imagine Festival and this conversation with Gavin Esler tonight. He has recently written a book about how Britain ends, and we'll be talking about that later on. You may also remember him as a journalist at the BBC. Many's a night, a news night. He was holding people to account, and we'll maybe get to a little bit of that as well. He's written about the state of America. He's written about stories leaders tell in order to bring about change. He's penned 5 novels. There's quite a lot of strings to his bow. So if you have questions that you'd like to kind of fire at him, or you'd like me to fire at him, pop them into the Zoom chat, and I'll try and pick a few of those up as we go along and weave them into the conversation tonight. But we're here for about an hour, and Gavin, you're really welcome back to Imagine. Not at a pub with a pint this time, but as near as we can get you into the festival. So welcome back.
Thank you, and I'm afraid I'm going to stick with the water. I'd rather be in a pub, but there we are.
Next year, write another book and come back. We'll talk to your agent. You'll understand that if it wasn't already part of the Northern Ireland psyche, we would still want to kind of check you out. And the borders thing is really kind of important at the moment. Northern Ireland protocol, we have to be very careful what comes in. So I suppose to establish your credentials, can we ask, Gavin Esler, what does Northern Ireland mean to you? Because it's not just a place you've reported from.
No, it's not. In fact, the first Eslers that I'm definitely related to were found in County Antrim between Ballyclare and Ballymena in about 1720s. They may have been there before, I don't know. There's all up the Antrim coast. I've got a grandmother from Bushmills, so long family connections. My first job was at Belfast Airport at Aldergrove, as it then was, and I then spent I was at university in England, but I did a lot of cheese shoveling in my holidays in a creamery, also in County Antrim. So I think I'm not quite 100% native, but I've got Ulster in my blood, I suppose I should say.
And your first job in journalism was it in Belfast? Was that the Belfast Telegraph, or was that?
Yeah, the Belfast Telegraph, which was that was fantastic actually. But it was I have to say, I spent the first 3 months thinking, what on earth have I got myself into? Coming as a 22-year-old, was I 21, 22-year-old to work in Belfast on the Belfast Telegraph. My first journalism job, I wasn't quite sure whether I was cut out for it or not, as indeed I'm sure my editors thought the same pretty much.
Do you remember any of who were the people who had you under their wing at that stage? Do you remember any of them?
Well, the one who I remember a lot of them on the news desk in particular, but Norman Jenkinson, who was the news editor, he did take me under his wing, and I think he kept me right on 1 or 2 occasions. Kept me right quite brusquely, I would say, but I learned a great deal from Jenks. He was a fantastic guy.
Okay, and when you left, you ended up in the BBC, you did reporting locally, you ended up in London, and then they kept sending you back. Is that back for more punishment, or back because you wanted to come back?
I definitely wanted to come back. It was also partly, let's be completely blunt about it. In any journalistic job in London, which is the core of most of it at that time, if you didn't know Northern Ireland, you were going to put your foot in it in various ways. And they were very, very, not just the BBC, but other media organizations were very, very worried that you would just say something stupid. I mean, just for example, to know the difference between the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and Ulster, 9 counties, or Northern Ireland, 6 counties, and where Ulster unionism fitted into that, well, it's quite easy to make mistakes, and plenty of us did. So I think they sent me back partly because I wanted to go back, and partly because they thought I'd be less likely to put my foot in it, or at least they could blame me.
I have a feeling if I ask you for stories of when you did put your foot in it, we'll not get any at this because too many years have passed. But if I take you across to North America, you spent, I think, 8 or 9 years as kind of chief North American correspondent. That was kind of during the reign of President George Bush Sr., I suppose, and Bill Clinton's time, isn't that right? Is that?
Yeah, basically, I went there a lot before and after I was officially based there. So it was basically the Clinton years was when I was there,
Okay.
and a bit of George Bush Senior. But I just left, and I got back to London when somebody told me that Bill Clinton was involved in having sexual relations with a woman. And I didn't.
She wasn't his wife.
It didn't entirely express total surprise or shock by this. But I then spent the next year going back to the United States because of the impeachment proceedings. And it is it's a funny old world, isn't it? Because I spent 1 year of my life on that one lie of that one president, and then we've just had a president who, according to the Washington Post, told more than 20,000 lies in 4 years. So things have changed, I think.
And those are only the ones that they got around to fact checking or actually cataloguing. I've met the guy in the team, and it's amazing the relief that they feel that they have stopped doing it, because they've decided that Biden also tells untruths and gets things wrong, but not on the same scale, and they just can't face another 4 years of it.
Like a normal person, like, you know, we all make mistakes and we all get things wrong, and sometimes we tell lies. That Christmas present I got last year that I really love and put in a drawer, that one.
those socks that you haven't taken back and got a refund for. When you around that stage, I kind of reckon it was about 20 years ago, you kind of wrote United States of Anger. And there's a sense when I kind of I haven't read the entire thing, but when I flick through the bits of it, I kind of realized that what you're kind of expressing as, I suppose, was it a sickness in society was kind of one of the phrases that you used, that you saw this kind of cultural rather than economic breakup happening, breakage, fracturing in the country. And that has that come to pass in the 20 years that, you know, you saw something and it did happen. How do you reflect on that time? I mean, what were you seeing back in the Clinton age?
Yeah, it was really interesting because there was great optimism. There was the feeling that there was only one superpower in the world. The Soviet Union had fallen apart. Communism was dead. Everything that America touched seemed to be going really well. The stock market was booming. House ownership was up. Unemployment was very low. And then I met this cop in Annapolis, Maryland, who said to me, Bill Clinton says he's created, I think it was 11 million new jobs. He has, but my family have got 5 of them. This cop worked as a police officer, and on his days off, he'd extra jobs. His wife worked. They were middle-class people who were struggling to get by. And so I went around 48 of the 50 states, and I talked to a lot of people. And there was a clear disjunction between the America that I was reading about in the newspapers. So I call it America in the aggregate, all these figures about GDP and so on, and the America in the anecdotal, what people were actually telling me. And I said in the book, I didn't mention D. Trump Esquire, but I say in the book, if this continues, it would be very fertile ground for something really bad to happen in American democracy, because it is failing for huge numbers of decent, hardworking people. And there we are. I didn't mention Trump, but
but he fitted the mold that had been created for somebody his shape to kind of go into. It's fun. We can't hold you responsible kind of 20 years early, but there's a great line, page 296. If it's difficult to think of a president in modern times who inspires quite as much personal loathing as Bill Clinton does. He and his wife are symbols of the bad generation that lost or refused to fight, kind of in Vietnam. He turned out that he wasn't really the last president to attract personal loathing, and in fact, Donald Trump won't be the last, because Biden is hated by those who were fond of Trump and vice versa. We seem to be in a cycle now that actually it's not just that that it's okay to be a sore loser, that it's okay to really feel personally about your politics in America.
Yes, but I think I agree. But I think Biden is a healer, and I think Biden is actually, he has been, as George W. Bush would have said, he's been misunderestimated. But Biden is someone who talks very calmly, doesn't scare. Some people just loathe him because he's not Trump, but he has been very cautious in the campaign as a centrist Democrat, and now he's doing something incredibly bold. I mean, his scheme to give COVID relief is actually a big poverty relief program as well. It will benefit poor Americans, and that's one of America's race and poverty for some Americans in such a rich, great country. So we'll see how that goes. But he could go into history as someone who, like Roosevelt, FDR, has really tried to shift the balance of the economy towards poorer people, and that would be extraordinary.
But I mean, 4 years is a long time. Is a short time for a president to actually turn something around. I mean, there's a sense that Trump, for all his faults in my mind, he gave hope to people who thought that they hadn't been listened to. You know, when he turned those states to get elected, he was selling them a promise that he was going to listen to them and he was going to deliver for them. And by some metrics, he perhaps did deliver jobs, or jobs came around during his term. But that's a lot for actually Biden to switch around. Are the American people in all those different states, and they're all very, very different kind of feel to them? Do you think they will feel healed?
Well, I mean, as I said in the book, there's a lot of serious flaws in the American system, including, you know, the fact that the way in which their democratic system works. And it took Roosevelt 4 terms, well, he died in the middle of the 4th term, to really push things forwards, and World War II to rebuild the American economy in many ways. So the challenges are absolutely huge, but perhaps the sort of salesmanship that you referred to of Donald Trump will be what he's remembered for. But he sold people a car that's shiny on the outside, but actually it didn't work and the tires were flat. You know, that's the problem.
You've written a second book that kind of, it's not the same, but there's a certain sense that the theme is the same, that you're writing about a country that you see is falling apart, that is kind of fragmenting and so on, as you look at the UK. What do you see from the US and is there stuff that we can learn from the US as the UK kind of heads into the next few years of trying to figure out whether it can heal itself, reunite itself, or kind of implode? What are there distinct things that we can learn, or is actually America very different?
I think America is very different, but the one thing we can learn is that politics can change, people can change their minds, countries can move on. In fact, the inspiration of How Britain Ends, part of it was in Northern Ireland. I was in Northern Ireland in October 2019 when Boris Johnson, in the words of one of my friends that I was talking to, threw 100 years of Ulster Unionism into the Irish Sea. He'd met with Leo Varadkar, and he completely reversed what had been previous, not just government policy, but the whole stance. Somebody else said to me, actually, and this wasn't a unionist, you know, but Mrs. Thatcher said Northern Ireland was as British as Finchley. In customs terms, it's now as British as France. So, I mean, whether you agree with that or not, you could see that was a big moment, and it chimed not with in a way with what I'd seen in America, but also with something I'd heard in Scotland. I'd been just a few months before, I'd been in Edinburgh for the Edinburgh Book Festival, and some friends of mine who had voted no to independence in 2014 were, and the Scottish word is, and it will be understood to many people in Northern Ireland, scunnered by the fact that they were being dragged out of the European Union when they'd been told the only way to stay in the European Union is to vote no for Scottish independence. So those two things made me think, actually, not just about Scotland and Northern Ireland, but where was England in all this? You know, was it really part of the idea of Brexit that Northern Ireland and Scotland would go one way and England would go another? And what difference would that make to people? Mm-hmm. So that's really what was behind the book.
There's a quote just even before you get to the table of contents. In the book, you talk about there's a Lord Ashcroft poll from 2019. That's 3 years after the referendum, and he found that 76% of English Conservatives who voted Leave in 2016, they would prioritise Brexit, even if it meant Scotland gained independence. And of that same demographic who Conservatives who voted leave, 74% of them would choose leaving the EU over Northern Ireland, remaining part of the UK. I mean, that really is quite telling to your point that you develop in the book about English nationalism and a feeling of England is 80% of the UK, and if England believes this, then England will do what England wants rather than worrying too much. The union is a concept that is undervalued or just not valued any longer.
Yeah, and it's not just me who read that Ashcroft poll. One of the things I believe very strongly actually is that many politicians, many people in politics, Mrs. Thatcher is a good example, whether you liked her politics or really disliked her politics or hated her actually, as some people did. She stood for something. She had a plan. She broadly stuck to it. Tony Blair certainly believed in certain things and so on. I don't think actually Boris Johnson has a political philosophy. He has a style, and his style is to do what's broadly best for Boris Johnson. So if it came to doing something about the customs border in the Irish Sea, he's happy to do that because he's not if he's a one nation conservative, that nation is England. It's not the United Kingdom. And if he had been looking at those Lord Ashcroft polls, those were his voters. And his dilemma, or the Conservative Party's dilemma since 2015, when 3.8 million people, mostly in England, voted for Ukip, was what do you do about those voters? They should be my voters in the Conservative Party. And so if the reason I say he's got a style is who among us would have written two versions of Brexit, one in favour, one against, and then decided which one to do? Who among us would have two versions of what to do about China? On the one hand, we've got to trade with them. On the other hand, there could be an enemy. There's a whole series of things, including COVID, to kind of two versions. I did everything I could, but I didn't turn up to 5 Cobra meetings. So there's a pattern of behaviour, which means that if he reversed himself on the customs border, or if he changed his mind about Scotland or whatever, he will be looking at those voters. And if they don't care about the union, why would he care about the union? Mrs. Thatcher did. I don't think he does.
Political survival is very common to politicians, though, that keeping their party intact, keeping themselves in government, keeping a job, sometimes at the local level, of being an MP or an MLA or an MSP or something, that's probably the biggest priority that they have to kind of drive them. In a sense, can you fault them given the way that we all behave as voters?
Well, actually, yeah, I think I can fault them. I mean, if it is definitely true that the party system, if it's a two-party system in particular, can be quite pernicious. Because one of the questions I ask in the book actually is, how do you become Chris Grayling? Now, I've got nothing particularly against Mr. Grayling, but he was a serial failure in various government positions and continued to survive for many years. So how do you do that? Well, you do that actually by being loyal to the whichever leader it happens to be. And of course, you're going to get that in all politics. But that doesn't entirely, that explains actually one of the reasons, it seems to me, why so few people in England, Scotland and Wales in particular are actually members of political parties. Because most of us have, we may have very strong views about the Union or United Ireland or an independent Scotland or wherever, but a lot of other things, we're quite happy to listen to different views and maybe agree about, what's the best way to improve schools or how can you make the NHS a bit better or whatever it is. It's very difficult in particularly in a two-party system. The Westminster system itself is one of the things I say is clearly not fit for purpose. We have had the Blair period too, but with the current government, 43% of people voted for Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. 57% of people didn't, 56.4% actually didn't vote for him as Prime Minister, but we get him with a majority of 80. Now, the Northern Ireland political system.
I was going to say, you want to try and come over here, box of frogs kind of territory with 5 parties plus another 2-3 on the edges.
Yeah, sure. Every political system has got its faults, but what I'm trying to say is the Westminster system rewards mediocrity more than others.
Before we go into the detail, probably we should kind of refer to the fact that the book doesn't have a question mark at the end of the title, which does suggest, it hints at the fact that it's more definite than it's an open question. Did you have a bit of a struggle kind of just with yourself or with your editor or your publisher as to whether or not punctuation was required to kind of phrase it? Because that in itself could be, how a book is titled affects its sale, but also how it's perceived and the kind of the message as people open it up.
Yeah, well, I suppose it could have been entitled "How the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland Comes to an End Eventually, as it's currently constructed." But
I was going to let you away with the Britain bit as a yes, but we do feel left out, and thank you for picking up on the fact that we have been rejected again. Yeah.
As you know, I do in quite a nitpicking way throughout the book, because there's a wonderful bit from the Times which I frequently quote. I've got it written on the top of my notes here, which says, this was the Times newspaper last year: Iranian protesters burnt the Union Jack outside the British embassy in Tehran last night as the diplomatic crisis over the arrest of the UK ambassador grew, and they chanted "Death to England." So there you've got it. You've got England, the UK, and Britain. No wonder the Iranians are confused. This crowd know they hate us, but they're not quite clear who we are. And actually, while people in Northern Ireland are, and people in Scotland are, and people in Wales are, people in England very often aren't, because as they're 84% of the population, they quite often say English when they mean British, or British when they mean English. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't find a problem with it, but it means it's a different way of thinking about a rather complicated country, and it's very different from most people in Northern Ireland or in Scotland, for example.
Mm-hmm. You culturally, you kind of developed a point in the book about the four nations have drifted apart. Devolution has contributed to that very much. And it's actually only the Unionists in Northern Ireland that are increasingly realising, well, the only Unionists are in Northern Ireland, but they're increasingly realising that they've got stitched up by the big bullies in London, who they can no longer be the small bullies to, they kind of wind around their little finger as they did during kind of some of the previous elections. So, devolution has been very good for the nations, but it's also been very poor for the stability of the union. That's kind of one of your points, isn't it?
It is. Basically what I say is not that suddenly things that, Scotland's going to be towed into the North Atlantic or something. That's not what I mean by how Britain ends. What I mean is that the way in which we are currently organised cannot continue to exist, because there's so much discontent in different ways about it. That's why nationalism has grown in England as well. Ukip voters are an interesting example. The fact that 3.8 million people voted for Ukip in 2015 and got one seat, just one seat for nearly 4 million people, and he quit the party and became an independent. So they got nothing. Now, I don't speak for Ukip. I think that there was quite a lot about the party that I think we could question, but it is unfair to do that. And these were mostly voters in England. But we've also seen it with coronavirus. Northern Ireland has gone its own way, and Wales has gone its own way. But we all want, vaccines to work, and we all want the same thing. But Scotland has gone at a very different pace as well. And big English cities, Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester, and others, including Conservative mayors, have said, we don't think that this is quite working for us. So there are tensions. And the question is, how do you resolve the tensions in this hugely centralized system? And one of the things I argue in the book is their complacency about it in London is extraordinary. We're the envy of the world. We're not. Sorry to break this news. There's nobody would invent a House of Lords. Nobody has got 800 people, some of whom are government cronies, who suddenly get put into the House of Lords. It's just not done. Nobody would invent quite the system we've got. And even institutions that we love, that I certainly love, the NHS saved my life when I was 3 weeks old. I've got family who work for the NHS. The frontline staff have been amazing. The way in which it's organized, particularly in England, is ridiculous. And I've had, for instance, German doctors have said to me, why do British people think that we all envy the NHS when every year you have a beds crisis? Every year, and we don't. And I said, why do you not have a beds crisis? And they say, because we've got more beds. So we love the NHS. I love the NHS, but we don't pay enough for it. We don't pay enough for the nurses in it. And there's another, that's another good example. You know, the fact that in Scotland, nurses are going to get a 4% pay rise, and in England, they're going to get a 1% pay rise, tells you something about something really important to all of us, about the ways in which we're drifting apart. And the question is there any energy in Westminster, to try to do something about it? Who makes the case for the union? Who is saying the United Kingdom is a good thing and really demonstrating it? That, and also for nationalists of different types, what does being independent in a clearly interdependent world really mean? Now, people in Northern Ireland have thought about these things for years, and in Scotland too, and in Wales too. Most people in England haven't had to bother, and the political system doesn't help them. And I think what I'm trying to say in the book is, if they don't think about it, it will happen anyway in a messier and more disruptive fashion.
You also kind of develop an interesting point about the fact that our constitution isn't written down, and the web of kind of relationships between, I think you phrase it as kind of the crown, the government, parliament, courts, and then you get the devolved governments and parliaments into the whole thing. And we've been kind of muddling through, but we've reached the point of the elastic flexibility is basically bust. But actually, the fact that it's not written down, the fact that everything is just kind of taken as people understand it, isn't helping us. Now we're at the point of actual friction between the nations, and we're kind of ending up wondering which court, particularly in Scotland, I guess, because your court system, does the Supreme Court have a say in things in Scotland technically? Does it kind of logically, morally have a say? There's some things that can, some things that can't. It's got really quite confusing, even though this was all meant to help us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's quite a number of points in that. One of the points is that to many people, talking about the Constitution is boring. I mean, we want to talk about healthcare or our kids being educated, but it is really important. And just to give you one example, do you remember when Boris Johnson was sick with coronavirus? And then,
yes.
Then Dominic Raab was suddenly in the sort of Prime Minister-ish.
Yes.
What were his powers? And why was it him? And who decided it was him? And what would have happened if, Boris Johnson had been incapacitated for a much longer time? And so it's not that I don't know the answer to that. If you listen to any of the wonderful erudite people who are constitutional experts wittering on about it, they hadn't a clue either. Yeah. Could Mr. Raab have launched a nuclear strike from our Trident missiles on, I don't know, somewhere? We don't know. Well, who would stop him? How would the cabinet stop him? These are not airy-fairy questions. And
these are what Northern Ireland calls constructive ambiguities. And in Tony Blair's land of Good Friday agreements, it was impossible to have a bit of wriggle room so that you can do the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, and what struck me about that was, I mean, the United States has got a constitution and it still gets into a lot of trouble. But the fact that according to great historian Linda Colley, British experts have written constitutions for 70 different countries around the world, many of them ex-colonies, and they include modern Iraq and modern Germany. I'm not sure the Iraq one's going very well, but there we are. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But we don't have one ourselves. And not only that, if you look through what a mainstream of English historians say about this, including Macaulay, for example, he says, well, a written constitution is like paper money, but an unwritten constitution is pure gold. Spoiler alert, we don't pay for things with pure gold anymore. We don't even use paper money much of the time. In other words, things have moved on. And the idea that having an unwritten constitution is somehow majestic and brilliant because we don't really know what it means is just another way of muddling through from a kind of bit of eccentricity to actually a destination. And that's where we could get to now because of devolution. There are powers and that people can produce these arcane bits and pieces and say, well, they are sort of written down. But they're not codified. You can't do what any American can do or what any of us can do, which is Google, what does the American Constitution say? And you will get it like that on Google. So it's not a panacea for a wonderful world, because they'll still be struggling between various competing visions of what this country should be and whether it should even cohere. But it would at least be a start, or a recognition that we have got a bit of a problem.
Yeah. Don't forget, if you're watching on Zoom, if you can put questions down into the Zoom chat, I'll pick a few of them up. I see some from the Morgan household and from Debbie McCall. We'll come to those in a wee minute when we kind of hit those topics. But at the beginning, Gavin, we're kind of establishing your credentials in a kind of lighthearted way, just to kind of check that you're a good chap, as you might want to phrase in the book. And for anybody who's read the book, you'll be smiling, because the kind of notion, is it a Peter Hennessy kind of idea? But anyway, this idea of that they're good chaps, and if somebody gets a bit out of line and becomes a bad chap or a bad woman, then the rest will have a kind of a quick word with them, self-regulate, and the system that is not written down, but just everybody who has power will kind of help each other to hold power in a good way. And this has run the British system for a very long time, until we seem to have got to a point where actually there's more bad chaps arriving than can get quiet words in their ears. Is that it?
Yeah, well, I admire Peter Hennessy endlessly. He's really interesting, and he and his collaborators formulated this good chap theory of government, which means, and they're all chaps obviously, which means that that if a chap gets out of line, you have a word, and he knows to do the right thing, and he'll resign. Well, I'm not sure that's working anymore. In fact, the last big casualty of that I can think of was Peter Carrington, Lord Carrington, after the Falklands War. He said, look, I'm going to quit, because I was Foreign Secretary at the time. And actually, he didn't do anything particularly wrong. But I remember, as a very young reporter, talking to him sometime afterwards. He retired from politics. And he said he just thought it was the right thing to do. Now, that to me is a good chap. But we are not in a situation of where the good chaps are all over the place, that seems to me.
But yet another one of the columns that was holding us up seems to be a bit shaky, or slightly kind of worrying foundations. Kind of spoiler alert to anybody who hasn't read the book, but I get the feeling that you don't think it's. I mean, there's a couple of options. We could actually kind of wake up and smell the coffee and make some changes, and you suggest what some of those kind of things would be to kind of to reintegrate, or to at least kind of work sensibly with ourselves. But one of it feels like the more likely option is that we just kind of sail on, and politically there isn't the will to actually change things, and actually we do end up with the breakup of the union effectively. That Scotland very likely to have another independence vote that might be more successful. Northern Ireland could have a unification vote. That could happen. There's a whole Imagine Festival has kind of thought about this quite a lot during the week, given that the state of us is the title of the week. But kind of people predicting kind of 10 years hence what could happen, not just climate change. Are you pessimistic about the title of the book, that that's what's going to happen? I suppose also, do you mind? I mean,
well, in a way, I'm not pessimistic, in the sense that if people want to go different ways, and that is worked out, and we realize that we are going to be interconnected, that whatever happens, we're still going to have to deal with each other, that the island of Ireland and the island that involves Scotland, England, Wales will be only 30 miles apart, or whatever it is. Of course, we'll be connected by the Boris Tunnel, but so it'll all be fine. But so the thing that surprises me really is the degree to which people in England haven't woken up to the fact that this will matter for them. There's a Louis de Bernier, who I really admire. He's a great author, and he's written so eloquently of the breakup of the Ottoman Empire and about Greece and Turkey and so on. Is one of those who wrote in the Financial Times, and he repeated it recently in a letter to the Times, that basically it might be better for, I think I've got it here, it has been increasingly obvious to me and fellow leavers for years that the English would be better off on their own. It seems ever more obvious that Ireland can be reunified because, and he goes on to say that, however, he says, if the Irish were only being more strictly rational, they would leave the EU and opt for an Anglo-Irish economic zone. Now, this is very, very odd stuff from a writer that I really admire. It's as if it will all be business as usual for England if Scotland and Northern Ireland go the same way. I think in terms of Scotland going, what will they do with the British nuclear deterrent at Faslane? All these things that we're having extra bombs and so on. I mean, the Scottish National Party want rid of it. So are they is it going to be halfway up the Thames, located near the Houses of Parliament? I don't know. What will happen about the United Kingdom's membership of the Permanent Five of the UN Security Council? I don't know. Would it be English? I don't know. Probably not, actually. I think a lot of other countries would object to that in the General Assembly, and perhaps even in the P5. I can't imagine China, Russia, and Joe Biden's America being all that keen. I could be wrong. What are we going to do if Scotland does become independent and decides that it can join the European Union, which I think is certainly from the Scottish side is certain that they want to. And I've been talking to people who are much closer to EU thinking than I am, who say, well, it would be completely different from 5 or 6 years ago, because this would be a country that's not in the EU trying to join, rather than Scottish independence a few years ago.
But does English nationalism actually think through that? Is it not a bit like, if I could characterise Scottish independence and New Ireland, kind of thinking that there's quite an emotional thing to it? It's about people in England voted. The Brussels was 200 or 300 miles away from them, and they didn't want to be taking control from there. And if we go to Glasgow or Edinburgh or Belfast or Newry or Derry, you can say, well, London is 200, 300, 400 miles away, and we don't want to be taking kind of too much direction from there. It's the same kind of emotional thing. They're not really thinking about the Security Council and whether a Great Britain or an England and Wales, or just in England on its own, would actually have a much of a flag to wave. That's very secondary. We'll just go through this whole argument again, won't we? They'll vote to minimise themselves and then regret at leisure.
Yeah, well, I saw a wonderful tweet from definitely an English nationalist who said, the clocks go back this weekend. I want mine to go back to 1940. Well, actually, the clocks go forward this weekend. But leaving aside that thing, if we do take back control by people choosing independence, the clocks will go back to 1700 when, if we look at the original plan for Scottish independence, it was to keep the Queen as head of state of Scotland, but it was obviously to have separate parliaments, separate legislatures, and the role of Scotland would be kind of like a Commonwealth nation. I mean, that's what has been thought of and discussed for years in Scotland, and it hasn't been thought of except as oh my goodness, that wouldn't suit us in London itself. So in Westminster itself. So you're broadly right, but events, as we know in Ireland, events sometimes take a very, very strange turn, and nobody could have foreseen what would happen with the move for home rule and so on in the 19th century, and then finally being derailed by World War I. So a whole lot of things are still up for grabs. And it's not just me thinking about this, actually. George Osborne, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, has said Boris Johnson could go into history as the worst prime minister ever, worse than Lord North, who lost the American colonies, because he has unleashed English nationalism. That's George Osborne's words. He's unleashed English nationalism, and it could lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom. So there's one high Tory, very smart guy, again, whatever you think of his politics, very smart bloke, has thought about it. And I suspect Michael Gove has thought about it, actually, because he's Scottish, and he'll get this. But whether it's high on Boris Johnson's list of priorities, I don't think so.
Michael Crooks has kind of said, with unionism being rudderless at present, that could mean unionism within Northern Ireland. It could also mean unionism within the UK. I think I've kind of maybe interpreted both ways. Are they bringing a united Ireland? And I might extend that to a independent Scotland about by default or incompetence. So I suppose one version of the question is Boris Johnson and what has happened in England, is that the inevitable consequence in your mind? I mean, you speak as a Scot, but you also speak with a little, more than a little knowledge of Northern Ireland and how we think.
Well, I don't think anything is inevitable, but I would say to you, Lisa, since the book was published, which is last month, I have had a lot of conversations, including separately with two Scottish Conservatives, separately. And I asked them both, what would stop Scotland becoming independent? Maybe 5 years, 10 years, or whatever. And they both said a Labour government, which really kind of surprised me. So, and what I've found in other conversations is that when people who are SNP would tend to say, when Boris Johnson makes his fleeting visits to Scotland, well, we don't really see the point of it. Secretly, they're quite delighted because they think it helps their base. And when Scottish Tories see him coming to Scotland, they die a little bit inside because they don't think he speaks to unionism for unionism. And in Northern Ireland, I mean, everybody listening will know it better than me, but just as an observer, I was really astounded that that the DUP would be in favour of Brexit, but vote against every possible kind of Brexit that was on offer, including no deal Brexit. So what was the point of that? I don't know. Maybe somebody can clue me in here, but that didn't strike me as, and given that we now have a customs border in the Irish Sea with all the things I read about in the newsletter about, you know, bringing in mud from Scotland on tractors and so on, it's obviously a total mess. So I don't know. I don't know whether Michael's question was about unionism in Northern Ireland or generally, but it seems to me, whichever way you look at it, it's not in a good shape.
Let's take a few kind of quite quickly. Sharon and Gareth Morgan, not sure which of the household is behind this, but what do you think, Gavin, about the idea of a Iberian Union comprising of the whole of Ireland and Scotland as an EU member state? I mean, other than the difficulty in actually constructing that legally, physically, politically, but I mean, in 50 years' time, is that an option?
Well, two things about that. One which is very brief, which is it would get Scotland into the EU quite quickly, I would think. More seriously, I say in the book, I had on the day of the Brexit vote, I bumped into, I was in Edinburgh, and Scotland voted to remain, and Edinburgh was very solidly for remain. I bumped into a very prominent member of the SNP, and he said to me, he was very, very angry and very upset. But the first thing he said to me is, "We've got to talk more to the Irish Republic." And I hadn't a clue what he was going to talk about. Actually, I thought that was. But what he said was that he said Scotland has got to form a stronger relationship, whatever happens, with Dublin, and that may actually ease things in Northern Ireland for obvious reasons of kinship, including my own with the unionist community, and it may lead, because he said the Irish Republic has changed greatly over the past 20 years, which I think we'd all agree. So I don't know where any of that is going, and I know that there have been talks between the Scottish government and the Irish government about things they can, maybe bring in more tourism or whatever.
If we could get that tunnel built, we could get an extra one from Dublin, a particularly long one from Dublin Port up through the Isle of Man and hit Scotland.
The other thing that was said to me was, you do realise that when we all joined, including the Irish Republic, the European Economic Community in 1973, Ireland was a much poorer nation by GDP per capita than the UK, and now Ireland is a much richer nation by GDP per capita than the UK. So if you have a look at the figures,
the fact checker in me wants to do that, but I'll just
didn't believe it, but it's true. I mean, and we know there are all kinds of problems in the Irish Republic about various things, including differences between rich and poor and all that sort of thing. I'm just simply saying that the tectonic plates of these nations are shifting, and I'm not quite sure which way they will go. And some people will be resolute in Northern Ireland that they shouldn't shift in a particular direction. But whatever happens, people in Belfast, Dublin, Cardiff, and Edinburgh are really thinking about it. London, I'm not so sure about.
People enter politics from all kinds of professions, But journalists, it's kind of often it's one of the most surprising. It's hard to forget your old colleague Martin Bell, the man in the white suit, standing in Hatton, taking on Neil Hamilton. Was it 24 days before the 1997 general election? He turned up and he won, and he made the mistake of saying he'd only do it for one term, and he kept to his word. My goodness, an honest man. But I mean, journalists, you tend to be a cynical bunch. You see a lot of things happen and you kind of raise your eyebrows at it. What went through your mind when you signed up to the Independent? I was going to say the Independence Group, but the Independent Group, that's now, I guess, called Change UK. But it's about this time 2 years ago, you signed up and you were top of the list on the kind of candidates for the election. So what was your thinking, kind of jumping ship from journalism to dark side politics?
Yeah. Well, I looked around at the politics in London, which is where I ran. We got 117,500 votes, which wasn't bad, but we had about 6 weeks, which didn't change the world. Let's put it that way. But I wanted to do something because I thought, looking at the other parties, we were going to be in such a terrible mess, whatever happened. Because I thought the Labour Party was in a hopeless state with Jeremy Corbyn. I thought the Conservative Party and the mess over Brexit was going to lead us into the kind of trouble that I've talked about. And so it was just taking a stand, actually. I mean, I'm not sure whether you forgot some of those. You said Martin Bell, an old friend of mine, and he endorsed me, and which I'm sure got me a few votes in London. But having looked at some other journalists who've gone into politics, one
made him to be prime minister by some.
I'm not sure. I'll tell you one thing though. I wouldn't have written two versions of what to do about Brexit and decided at the last minute which one I was in favour of.
Were you disappointed though that you didn't end up as you'd have been an MEP, wouldn't you? Were you disappointed?
I was relieved. We did have discussions in the household about what the hell are you doing, and my wife did vote for me. At least she told me she voted for me.
Obviously, of the ballot box, you don't know what happens.
But look, I wanted no career in politics, but I did want what I wanted, and I was very clear. I said, maybe this is one of the reasons I didn't get in it. I said, look, I wanted this as a platform to say that Brexit is going to be an absolute disaster, and we need to rethink, because otherwise things are going to get much, much worse. And I don't have any great genius at spotting this. It was blindingly obvious we're going to end up, and we only know part of the mess now. But if we all are lucky and COVID gets off the front pages, we will all wake up to the kinds of issues that Northern Ireland has had, the things that are happening at Dover, the problems of just little things like those people who wanted to take a dog from one part to the other, or get in a car and go to France, all those things. The fact that so many ferries from Ireland now are going straight to France, the fact that the Scottish fishermen from the northwest coast who make these fantastic, pick up langoustine and scallops, are finding their catches are dying before they can get over there. The whiskey people that I've talked to, I've got a friend in Isla who was saying, you've no idea the paperwork we now have to do to send a case of whiskey, of top value malt whiskey, to Germany. I've got relatives in Germany, wife's got relatives in Germany, and a friend sent us a present, and the present ended up with a £50 tag on it to pay for duties on whatever it was, and the present anyway. So we've got all that to come, because Brexit is not done.
You keep in touch with any of your old party friends? Because in a sense, it was a group, a movement, a party that it kind of killed a lot of careers, though I guess those careers were kind of maybe coming to an end due to Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party not necessarily supporting some of the Labour folk in it. But do you keep in touch with them? Is there a WhatsApp group of folk who still would like to change the world?
There's no WhatsApp group, but I certainly do keep in touch with some of them. Yeah. So we have chats every so often. But that's part of the problem. I mean, I know the two-party system again. There were those who quit the Conservative Party because they found that actually their own areas of the Conservative Party, their own districts, that some of the members had views much to their right and they didn't like it. And I know there was one person who from the Labour Party who told me, and the Labour Party MP told me, we had to change the hall where we had our constituency meetings because there was a small group of very radical people on the far left of the party who kept the meetings going till after 1 o'clock in the morning when everybody else would go home, and then they would pass resolutions because people with a job would disappear. I said, what do you mean you changed the hall? Well, we changed it to one where they kicked us out at 10 o'clock so that normal people could be involved in party politics. Now, that's from both the Conservatives and the Labour Party. There were people who were saying, there's something wrong with the way we do things. It's just not, you know, normal people, as one of them said, don't want to join a political party and go through that kind of stuff.
The debate is well worn in Northern Ireland in terms of, you know, do you join an existing party if you want to change the world, or do you try and set up a new one? We had NI21 was our version. It did last slightly longer than 21 weeks, but it self-imploded 2 days before its first big election. And one of my local councillors is the only person who actually got elected, and he's now an SDLP councillor. But as a Scot, do you have an opinion on kind of Alex Salmon's nuclear option of starting a new party? Because I mean, starting a new party, the problem is you don't come with an infrastructure, you don't come with a campaign team, you have a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of people who join for all kinds of different reasons and things. So I mean, what do you make of that? I think was there one SNP MP who kind of defected today, Kenny McAllister, is it, or McCaskill?
Kenny McCaskill, I think officially within the SNP, there's a great deal of relief about Kenny going.
But there's not a great deal of relief that their former leader has now set up Alba as a new party.
It's a very odd situation. I mean, I personally don't think Mrs. Salmon, who I've known for many, many years, is coming out of this very well, because it sounds as if he has a grudge and he wants to continue it. So that's part of it. But under the system in Scotland, the way he's doing it is he's not running for direct elections. He's running on the list system.
So constituency-wise, you elect some people. So you've kind of 2 votes. You can vote for people directly for them to be elected, and you can also vote for a party in a sense. Yeah. And then if enough people get it, the list fills up, isn't that it?
And you know, there's been a lot of to and fro about this. But Peter Kellner, who used to run YouGov, is an old friend of mine. He wrote an article about 6 weeks ago, before this stuff with Alex Salmon, and he said, if Scots want to maximise the yes vote, they should, in some constituencies, give their first vote to the SNP and the second vote to the Greens, because the Scottish Greens are a pro-independence party. Now that was very interesting, and that's what Salmon's pitch has been actually, which is you will maximise the independence vote if you vote first vote for the SNP candidate and the second vote for our party. Now, there is a bit of truth in that, and he is although there's no party structure, he is a very intelligent bloke who speaks very well, and he will get quite a bit of publicity. The only other thing I would say is there might be a bit of blowback on this anyway, because the First Minister has been cleared, and there are those, and I've talked to them, who say, you know, there's a bit of resentment about the way in which this has gone on, and essentially, when a man has not behaved particularly well, the idea of a woman losing her job is not something that is a good look for Scotland. So I don't know how, you know, there's so many individuals who will take different views on this, but it may not be as disastrous for the SNP as Alex Salmon might think. It may not
I suppose an easier question is, does it help or hinder those who want Scottish independence? Because I guess over in this island, we're kind of looking to Scotland because it gives us a bit of an idea of what campaign might be like, even though ours would be infinitely more complicated.
Well, you know, one of the things, shortly after the 2014 vote, a year after actually, in 2015, I was up in Aberdeenshire, Murray, where Alex Salmon was running, and he gave me a copy of his book, which is called The Dream Shall Never Die, and he'd written this book saying, we just lost this independence referendum, but let me tell you why we're going to have independence. So nationalism is not going to go away anywhere, because there's always a good side to it, and there's always on the fringes something that, that can get very nasty, as everybody in Ireland knows, and Northern Ireland knows particularly well. So whatever happens in these May elections, it is not going to go away. Scottish nationalism is not going to go away, not going to disappear. And it's not actually, in my view, being offered a coherent reason why the United Kingdom, again, to go back very quickly in history, the UK was founded on three things. Almost all historians agree: Protestantism, empire, and war. Now, those three things are less relevant now, and I hope war is completely irrelevant now to the UK. So what is it about? What is it that keeps us together beyond the nostalgia for the past? And that really is the big question for the book, from the book. And I'd like a big answer, please. If Boris Johnson would get in touch, I'll quote him when we print some more copies.
That'll be a great way to have a second edition. I'm going to take some more kind of questions. They'll come slightly randomly in a sense, but Dexter, one of his questions is around the fact of, I suppose, do we have a COVID kind of public inquiry? And if so, do you think any politicians will face personal repercussions? They tend not to when it comes to these things, no matter which side of the sea you're on. But do you think anybody will go down for COVID?
Well, I think we should have a public inquiry. I think we probably will have some kind of inquiry, maybe some different inquiries actually in different places, because there's lots of positive lessons to learn rather than just sort of stringing people up because they didn't do the job. Do I think that anybody will? Well, the good chat theory of government would suggest that you wouldn't say you did all you could, as the Prime Minister said, on COVID when you missed the first 5 COBRA meetings on it. So I don't think, what's that old joke? He had every virtue except resignation. I don't think anybody's going to quit, and I don't think anybody will lose their jobs. Although when we start looking at some of these contracts, that will be very interesting.
James Mackey, if I kind of paraphrase his question to me, I suppose if you ended up as a spin doctor or a special advisor or kind of brought in as a consultant, what would you kind of recommend that the English do to stop, or maybe to kind of take them to the precipice, to look over and then say, now step back and start behaving like good chaps? What would your first or second things be that would actually turn England around? Because that seems to be where the problem is, in a sense.
Well, there'll be a number of shocks coming up, I think, and there'll be also changes. You know, we live in a monarchy. Her Majesty the Queen has been, even most people who want a republic, which is very few in most of the United Kingdom, would imagine that this Queen has been quite the most important rock of Britishness in the United Kingdom. So that there will be changes. There will be changes at the very top. Please think about what you would like the future to look like. What would be the role of the monarchy? What would be the role of Parliament? Maybe just think ahead for a bit.
Finally, my kind of spare question, just in case we run out, was kind of something like, if Andrew Neil phones you up and offers you a job in GB News, the new news channel that will be on a few nights a week, realising he needs some kind of liberal pro-EU Scot to balance things up a wee bit, what would go through your mind? I'm not going to ask you whether you'd say yes or no. I'm not even going to ask you, has he phoned? But I mean, if you were approached, would you think about it?
Oh, well, I think it was a hoax call, to be honest.
You'd recognise his accent, you would.
Well, no, actually, I know Andrew. I think Andrew is actually a formidable interviewer and a great intellect. I'm not sure that if the premise of GB News is to be a right-wing news channel, well, good luck to them. But I think that limits your audience somewhat, I would say.
And does that feed into how Britain ends? Because it's kind of taken apart. It's celebrating a kind of a slightly partisan view on the union and on politics and Brexit and all the things that are forming the union. I mean, is that actually feeding into the problem in your book?
Well, I have no idea what this news channel will look like, and I have no idea why I would ever want to watch it particularly. I think one of the problems, without getting off point too much, is one of the problems in our world now is that we're all time poor. We have so much information. The question is, how do we sift it? How do we decide whether to trust this source or that source? And to have another source which says it's a right-wing source, well, it's going to be a right-wing source. So I would rather have a diversity of opinion and views. And having seen those who've been appointed, it looks as if it will be some kind of right-wing TV channel, and good luck to people who want to watch it. I mean, I find Fox News I used to watch for comedy value sometimes in America, but not for news or information.
Well, if you want to have a bit of thought about the state of the union, the state of us, depending on, you can define us in any particular way. I do recommend it. You might not agree with all the, I guess, all your thinking, but it, certainly as you lay it out, it does create some interesting thought, and it's kind of, it's well argued in its sense. So Gavin Esler, it's been a pleasure talking to you this evening. I hope we see you back in Belfast in person for a pint of the black stuff in your hand at a future festival with the next book. Is there a book on the way? I mean, can you tease us with, there is one being written that we can look to?
I've had discussions, so I don't know. I'm a bit knackered, to be honest. But if there's a couple of, and not a pint of the black stuff, if there's a couple of pints of the black stuff, I will be on my way.
I think the festival could probably stretch to that far. There's one more day, if you're still kind of watching, there's one more day of Imagine Festival left. It's not over until the big quiz at 9 o'clock tomorrow night. Before that, you can hear stories, you can see Bali, you can discover what's happening in North Africa, somewhere which the news doesn't really often take us to. You can hear arts being used as a form of resistance around the world. You can catch festival regular Paul Mason, who often comes along. He's talking about storming the Capitol. And you can also see a film about a mother pig, a flock of chickens, and a herd of cows. It's very Imagine Belfast. Gavin Esler, thank you for being part of the mad world that has been the festival for the last 6 days. And all the best. And we hope to see you again.
I hope Imagine Belfast goes from strength to strength. It's been a delight. And thanks for everybody for tuning in. Thank you.
Thank you.